Welcome back, my dear friends. It is Kristin and Mandy. We're coming at you with something a little bit lighter today. We have another mini episode. We called them minis at first. We don't really know what we want to call them still, but now we're going to take a little detour, perhaps, or enter a construction zone because we might have hit a
pothole.
I hate that one. That's my least favorite one. I don't know why. I think it sounds gross.
That's just Pennsylvania roads that are potholes.
That's true. Tons of potholes in this area.
Yeah.
Rocky roads all around.
Love PennDOT. What a great company. All right, moving on. Today we're going to talk about books.
So we know that our guests' stories are really, really, really important, and they're very strong, and they stand on their own, but sometimes they can get a little bit heavy. And if you guys come in preparing to cry your eyes out every week, you probably won't want to come back. So we're going to dabble in a couple of lighter topics, some self-help information, some resources, things that have helped us, things that have helped our guest. And today we just decided to talk about a couple of our favorite books. It might not necessarily be what we're reading right now or a favorite of all time, but just a couple that we thought might help the listeners because they helped us.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'll go first.
Sure.
My first recommendation, and because I'm at my house right now, I have the books in my hands. Kristin is not at her home. So if you're watching this on YouTube, which if you haven't seen it on YouTube, you can subscribe and watch us actually do these podcasts. But I have the books with me. So I'm going to show them on the screen because I literally have them sitting next to me. So my first book that I'm going to recommend to the ladies, is called For Women Only. And it's by Shanti Feldhahn. Anyway, it says, what you need to know about the inner lives of men. And this is kind of comical in a way because it just discloses how the male mind works. But I have to say that I was gifted this book by somebody a few years ago, right at the very, very beginning of my separation from my ex-husband. And this changed so much for me because topics that are talked about in the books, such as light bulb moments, respect, why a guy would want to impress you, how to encourage men. And this is more specifically talking in a romantic relationship type way, for sure. But it's just really good because it talks about the difference in a woman's mind and a man's mind and how they connect differently. Mm-hmm. And so there are biblical principles within it that are woven, but this book is really easy to read. It's like not much more than 100 pages.
Yeah, it looks pretty short.
It is short and it's little, so it's quick to read. But some of the things for me that really, really clicked while I was reading it that I didn't know prior to that, one of the things was how men find respect and how women receive love. And it was something that basically just one simple thing in this book just says, don't be sarcastic. It was like, wow, that actually can chip away at somebody slowly as a male that wants to be respected and feel empowered in their home. But it also talks about women and how we receive love differently. So like the things that we say and the things that we do are interpreted differently by a male than we are intending them to be. So it helps you kind of figure that out. So the first chapter is when the light bulb goes on, is like what the chapter's called. And it was a light bulb book for me, let me tell you. So any woman out there that is either struggling in a marriage or struggling in a relationship or just wants to know, to have, what do they call it? Like a preconditioned self for when a single person is then dating or marrying someone. And it's like biological reasons that a male mind is wired the way it is. And it's not boxing them in as one size fits all, but it's openly just sharing how some of the things that we do as women or some of the things that we say can be interpreted differently. Women, quote, nag their husband, or their husband, quote, shows no love to the woman by no like special romantic dinners. And I'm not going to say that's across the board with everybody, but that's a big thing that is in this like world that we live in, you know, and this really talks about why that's the case and how to prevent that and how to not do that. And when I read this book, I realized the faults that I had in my first marriage, and it was a game changer. So I highly recommend it. If you read it, let me know what you think. Honestly, it's not like these crazy concepts. It's just life, and it just makes sense. So that's my first recommendation.
So I have a question. You said you would recommend it to people who are struggling, but it also sounds like anybody who is just in a relationship or getting ready for a relationship could benefit from. Do you think it's specifically for people who are in a place where they're finding tension and stress, or could someone who thinks that they're in a perfectly healthy relationship also benefit?
I think like both. There is a sequel apparently called For Men Only. Obviously, I didn't read that one. I guess I probably should. But this
No
one,
girls
For Women
allowed.
Only, like I would give this to any premarital counseling person, because when I got married, and this is just speaking from my experience, I had no idea how to be a wife.
Mm,
And I just thought I knew because I had seen my mom do it for so long. And then I thought that the way that my mom was a wife to my dad was the way that I should be a wife to my husband.
mm-hmm.
And it was very clear that that's not how it was going to work, because my
Because you're just
husband
your
at the
mom.
time, yeah, and my husband and my dad are very different in
Mm-hmm.
how they receive and need things. But it talks about um, how to handle that and the knowledge that you need. um it's almost like if you go, this is like a weird image, I guess, but for me, I'm a clarinet player by trade, so I studied clarinet in college, and to know how a clarinet works helps you play it better because
Mm-hmm.
you understand the materials that it's made out of and why the buttons do what they do and the keys, and like how to play it, and the wood that it's actually made out of, the consistency of it. um like you need to know. I feel like that's kind of anything with a job. Like if you're going to be um a teacher, you need to know how to teach before you become a teacher. And so this is kind of one of those books where it teaches you how to be a wife and how to work with men in a very biblical role. I would say pretty traditional. So it's just clear. It's not hard to read, but it gives you tips and tools to put in your toolbox of, I'm consistently saying this to my husband or my significant other, and this is how they're responding. Well, yeah, because they receive it differently, because
Mm-hmm.
that's how it is. I mean, there's a reason why in the Bible it says that men want to be respected and women want to be loved, because that's how we receive love. Men receive love by being respected, and women receive love by being loved and emotionally supported and all of that. So I don't know. It was just, for me, it was like the time in my life, someone handed me this book and it changed everything for me. And I just humbled myself to realize the ways that I messed up in my marriage. Not that my divorce was because of me, and not that my divorce was because of him. It's just, it takes two people, it's two sides. And this helped me really realize that.
I'll have to check that out. I'm very curious because I already have like little flags up. Like, I'm glad that you say it's not boxing people in, because I'm saying like, how could all men, how could all women? This doesn't make sense. What about same sex couples? What about all this? Like, does that mean that they both need to be loved and not respected? And all, my brain's kind of going on a, just for my
Hmm.
own understanding. I would love to go into
Yeah.
that to see if that
Even
changes what I'm
like I was
worried.
actually rereading this not too long ago, just because I think it's a good reminder and it's such an easy book to read. So I literally just opened to this one page, and one of the topics says showing public respect goes a long way. And it's how you treat your significant other in public,
Mm-hmm.
and how that really changes a lot of things. So when I was married the first time, I mean, we can go into detail, I'm not going to, but when I was married the first time, the way that I treated him in public was very different than I plan to treat my next relationship in public, because I learned just from reading this book, it is a big thing to talk positively and not,
Mm-hmm.
I've been in rooms with wives that like bash their husbands the whole time. And I'm like, this is not fun. Like,
Well,
this is horrible.
even if it's not in an intentionally harmful way, like you've met Cody, you know that he teases, he like says silly things all the time. He
Yeah.
would he used to, until I talked to him and asked him not to do that. He used to like say little things right as I got close enough to be within earshot, and they'd be like, "Oh no, here she is."
Hmm.
And I said, "I know you're teasing, But it's really awkward when I walk up to a circle of people that I haven't met yet and you're pretending to hide from me. Because I know you think it's hilarious and I know you think it's funny, but it makes me feel uncomfortable. And people would,
Hmm.
I don't know what they're thinking. Like, do they think I'm like some jerk? Like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'm sorry. Like, and he actually
Hmm.
realized that it would be hurtful, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that's intentionally harmful. It's
Hmm.
what are your actions in public doing to affect the other person?
Yeah, for sure. So it has a lot of good points in there, and exactly that exact example. Wow, that was a lot of X's. That example that you used is what it's sharing. It's
Mhm,
saying he's meaning for it to be playful, but for
mhm,
you, you're interpreting it as hurtful,
mhm,
and it's not. That's not helping your relationship. So this is, so it's a great thing for you to say that, but this
mhm,
that's a point that she makes in this book, is to not do that to your significant other. And I know I was guilty of doing not exactly what Cody did, but I did stuff like that in public. And so for me to
mhm.
accept, like, I'm not going to do that moving forward, because I
Yeah.
know that that's considered disrespectful
Mhm,
as interpreted from a male mind. But, in the moment, you think it's playful and fun. So,
mhm.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
that's my recommendation. I could talk more about it at another point, but I think we've gone long enough. So, what is your first book that you recommend?
So mine is totally different. I'm going to start with a book called High Achiever, and that is, it was a book that was given to me by my friend because she read it and she thought I'd enjoy it. And those are my favorite books where it's like, oh, I thought of you while I was reading this. But it's by a woman named Tiffany Jenkins, and the subtitle is The Incredible True Story of One Addict's Double Life. And so if
Hmm.
someone's ears just perked up saying, oh, I know the name Tiffany Jenkins. It's because she's an Instagram personality. I don't know what you would call her, but she's a lot of people know who she is because she shares a lot of different things on her page. She's very raw. She's honest. She doesn't lay all her cards out on the table. For example, I know I can see there's something, quote unquote, something going on with her right now, but she's choosing not to disclose it. But that's just her being honest and saying, hey, I haven't been on much and everything's fine. The kids are safe. My marriage is not failing or whatever it is that people are assuming when you don't show a lot of pictures of certain people. So, but it's really interesting because she goes on and she talks very openly about so many different things, and it's about showing like the real side of her. And so this book that she wrote is about her own experience, and she spent a couple of months in a Florida jail after having, I'm not going to spoil all of it because there's a lot of stuff that kind of gets built upon, and it goes back and forth and kind of shows how she got to the point where she got arrested and how she kind of went out of control in a way that she couldn't see in the moment, but after the fact she did. And then it kind of leaves it open ended, but it also talks about different treatments and different things that she was not open to at first, just different things that she learned to be more open to, her experience in jail,
Hmm.
which, again, working with individuals who have been incarcerated, and then my husband, who's a sergeant out of jail, it's very, I feel like I know more than most people about what that life looks like, but I also don't know nearly as much as some others.
Hmm.
So, because I don't work in a jail. The people who work in that setting, that would be the front line. And
Sure.
they really can see what happens. I just know the stories that I've been told from both the correction side and the previous inmate side. And it's not always the most positive place to be. And she's pretty open and honest with her feelings and with certain things that happened. I don't know if there's any limitations on what she was allowed to share, but I thought it was a really interesting look into the other side of addiction, where a lot of people, and again with some of our guests, we've even talked about this. A lot of people say like, "Oh, this person is addicted. They don't have anybody who loves them. This is why they're homeless. They went AWOL because they're a deadbeat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." But you're not leaving the womb as a coke addict, right? Something happened between birth and where you're at right now to get you to that point. And it's a series of little tiny things that can accumulate into incarceration, into some really, I mean, sometimes death, sometimes really awful experiences. But for her, it turned out, obviously, if she's on Instagram now, then she's out of jail. But
Right.
it's, she's published, she's doing okay. Um, it turned out to be a much more positive experience after she did a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And after she kind of experimented with some treatments and really found what was right for her.
So you would recommend this to who?
I think it's a benefit for definitely not younger. I know a lot of our middle schoolers and high schoolers really love, like, for example, I have an elementary school student right now who's a client whose favorite TV show is Squid Game, and that makes me want to cry because that's an awful, really graphic show. So I know that a lot of people like to expose younger kids to that, but I think just maybe late high school if there's emotional maturity there, but I don't think that younger, like adolescents, pre-eds could handle that. I think it's really important for everybody to try to do their best to understand why humans are the way they are. And
Mm-hmm.
this is one of my favorite things is understanding what makes people tick and how people got to the place that they are and how they can get out of it. But
Mm-hmm.
that's just part of what makes me me. I think that her sense of humor and her um, she has a really imagery based style of writing. You really felt like you were in the moment. I think that will make it feel like more of a fiction book for some people, which is
Mm-hmm.
what some people prefer. And so there is some level of drama to it because it is a very dramatic story, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Her way of writing and her way of explaining it helps to make it more digestible. So I think if you're a human, you would benefit from learning about the difficulties of other humans so that you can have a little more compassion for people who might be panhandling on the corner or asking you outside of Wawa if you will give them the lunch that you just bought for yourself.
Right. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, discretion with that in any case, but there is a real life picture to people that are in those positions,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not it's intentional for them. But
Absolutely.
there's a story behind it. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I love
Mm-hmm.
that. That's a great book. I will definitely want to check that one out too. My next book. So we each have two books. So I'll share my second book that I'm gonna share. Um, the book that I chose to share about, which I'll show it again if you're watching this on YouTube and you can see it. It's called "To Hell with the Hustle" by Jeff Bethke. And we were actually just talking about this before we recorded because Kristin said she wants to read it. But the subtitle to it is "Reclaiming Your Life in an Overworked, Overspent, and Overconnected World." And the reason that I picked this book up, not only because I like the author and the books that he's written, I really just liked that this perspective was from another Christian viewpoint. But the fact that he said "to hell with the hustle" um, just was eye-opening because we live in a hustle culture and people need to work themselves and work and work and work and work and work and
Mm-hmm.
work and work and work to get what they need. And this just talks about how our culture has changed over the years, and it goes back in history about what people had, and really kind of goes back to even like the Industrial Revolution as things became more machine based,
Mm-hmm.
even with paper being created, with cars being created. And as all this machinery kept picking up and doing the jobs of the people, and how fast things started changing. Fast forward now to the technology. I mean, 5 years ago, if you have a computer that's 5 years old, it's dated now.
Mm-hmm.
But some people can have a typewriter that works great that's 60 years old, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
just so different. So it talks about how our culture has changed and how we can stop that in our own tracks and in our own lives. And I know I'm guilty of it, and it's something that I'm aware of on a daily basis because um, I have that mindset of working really hard, and basically, like, nothing, I won't be able to reap what I sow until I'm done. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not a healthy mindset, especially as a single parent when I also have to take care of a child. I can't just be working and volunteering and serving and doing all of these things outside of being a mom. And this,
Mm-hmm.
like, I need to be reminded that that's my first job. But of course, you want to, money can be very motivating, can happen. Uh, what do they call it when you're climbing a ladder? Like, uh,
Mm-hmm.
tiered, I'm drawing a blank, go figure.
Upward
But
mobility.
yeah,
Right.
along
Yeah.
those lines, like moving up, achievement can be very motivating. A label, something. And while I don't want to be focused on an item or a material thing, it can help at times. Like getting promoted does help with your life when you're a single parent. So,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. This just really talks about how we can still thrive and do well and live biblically in the way that God intended us to live by not going berserk and thinking that our hair is going to be falling out and spinning 15 different plates at one time, which I am
Mhm.
very familiar with. Honestly, when things stop, I feel like something's broken.
Mhm.
So it's just a good reminder. And I may actually reread it. I did read this entire book in one day. So
Whoa.
it
It's
was
not
really
like
good.
reading.
Another easy to read book. Very
Mhm.
good. I just had a whole afternoon that I didn't have anything planned and I opened the book and I couldn't put it down. So, yeah, but it has some also really, really cool statistics in it talking
Mhm.
about the amount of information that we absorb now with having our phones and our computers in front of us, and the amount of data that a brain I forget what the actual specific one was. You'd have to read the book, but it talks about the amount of data that we consume in one day is as much as somebody would consume 150 years ago, maybe in their entire lifetime. And so it's
Wow.
just these astounding statistics of our
Mhm.
minds and the way that technology and the world and our culture has driven this hustle into us and really shown us as a culture, if you don't hustle, you will fail.
Mhm.
And that is not biblical and that's not correct either. So,
Well,
um,
it's so commonplace now to expect, well, if you are going to work up in the world, you have to work harder to do so. Or if you want a
right.
specific job in this specific place, you have to be a quote unquote thoroughbred. You have to be able to work yourself to the bone and not
Yeah.
accept anything less than that. But that's like personal example. I started the job that I'm in now back full time back in February. And the only reason I know that is because I just audited all of my invoices. So I know my exact start date. But before that, I was making a lot more money. I was supervisor at a very difficult group home, and I was well regarded. I worked with county officials. I had respect. I had not the best schedule, but I was making a lot more money, and I had a title, and I had connections, and I was approached to come back to full time music therapy, and I said sure. And my goodness, I don't think I realized until after I was out of that hustle, out of the expectation of, oh, you're going to be on call for an entire week once a month. And if we need you, you come in immediately, you run your butt off until you leave, and then you come back tomorrow and you do the same thing. So I am so much more respectful now of my days off. As you know, there are certain days like, no, that's your day with Cody, or that's your evening with Cody. And then being able to put those boundaries on and say, I refuse to hustle for the purpose of X, Y, and Z. I think that
Yeah.
it's getting more acceptable, I think, to do things like the 4-hour work week, which I would
Hmm.
love. I mean, 4 day.
4 day. I would
The
love a 4-hour work
four
week.
hour work week is actually another book too. I haven't read it, but yeah, the 4-day work week. I would love the 4-day work week because then you'd be able to have a lot better boundaries with that free time. You would have your own free time. You're more refreshed. And then studies have shown you're more effective when you come back to work after that 4 days or after that 3 days off. So
Yeah,
there's some give
absolutely.
and take
Hmm.
there.
Yeah. So the way that I grew up, I always assumed that you work 9 to 5, a typical job. And after experiencing the last couple of years, I've seen other people take extended time off, or myself. I took some extended time off of working last summer, and then went back part time just because I wasn't in a place that I could sustain a full time job. And while I
Mhm.
was very grateful that I could do that financially and still provide, um, that was a huge blessing for me. It was also so out of the norm. And that's what this book really talks about. Like, to hell with the hustle. Like, you don't need to work as much as you work. Some
Mhm.
people do. And that's you. Yes, I'm not saying don't work, but there's other varieties out there than a 9 to 5 job. And there's other ways that you can thrive. Maybe that's budgeting differently so that you can work a 4-day work
Mhm.
week, or maybe that's finding a new job. Maybe some people just can't, and that's okay. But you don't need to work so hard to the point that you miss all of your life. and everything around it. So this book just is a really good reminder of taking those breaks, whether it's a social media fast, whether it's a time off of work, whether it's extended vacations, whatever that is that gives you that break and that rest. This book also talks about Sabbath, which is a biblical perspective, but it just talks about having a day of rest in your
Mhm.
week and how much more productive you can be because you have one day that you don't work, which is so counterintuitive for us in
And
our
we're
society.
talking real rest too, not
Yeah,
I'm going to fill my day with seeing 12 friends that I haven't talked to in a year
right.
and spend 4 hours, a real rest.
Yeah, and not
Because you're
just
not working.
binging Netflix for 10 hours. That's not resting your mind either. So, but yeah, it's an intentional, they call it, quote, active rest, which is very
Mhm,
funny, but it's so true. And having that. So, a lot of times, and I'm guilty, like, I'm so guilty of this too. So, I'm like preaching to the choir on this book, and I probably should reread it yesterday. But you have the same concept where you take a day of the week and you don't work. Don't check your
mhm,
emails. Turn off your phone if you have to. Again, I'm preaching to the choir here, but um yeah, it's just like a good book. So that's just why I would recommend it to literally anybody.
mhm,
I would say teens and above could read this book. Um it's easy. Like I said, I read it in a day. So,
mhm.
but great reminders. So I highly recommend.
Beautiful. Okay, my second one. I mentioned this in another interview recently, but it's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. The subtitle is Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results. And it's actually, I was thinking about this as I was talking about High Achiever, how with her book, it's tiny little things that accumulated into negative behaviors and a really destructive life pattern. Whereas what James Clear is talking about is taking the tiniest little things and changing them to improve your life. And so, what I really loved about this book is that as I talk to it, it's going to sound like it's a textbook. I talk to it, talk about it. It's going to sound like a textbook, but it's not. It's got resources, it's got worksheets, it's got diagrams in it, it's got a bunch of different ways to help you to digest the information that James Clear is giving you. So, an example. So, if you drive the same route to work every single day and you pull into a certain coffee joint or a certain fast food drive through a couple of times, guess what? Next time you drive past that place, you're more likely to pull into that place because it's now an unconscious habit.
Sure.
For example, I have a glass of water next to my bed. Every single night, I fill it up. Almost every night, Cody drinks it all, and then he has to refill it for me. So then, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing that I've been doing, because I don't drink a lot of water, the first thing that I've been doing is have as much of that as I can handle. Usually, it's about 16 ounces first thing in the morning. Sometimes it's like 3 in the morning and I wake up really thirsty. But that way I start my day off with a good habit. And so the fact that it's convenient and it's right next to me and I've done it a couple times, that's now a positive habit.
Yeah.
So he talks about all these ways, and it's not 10 steps to change your life. It's assess yourself. It doesn't give you a list of things to change. It asks you to look at what you're already doing in your life, and it asks you how to change the tiniest part of it in order to make it a positive habit instead of a destructive one.
So it promotes self awareness
For
as
sure.
well as habit forming.
Yes, absolutely. And just being able to assess. I think one of the first things that you're supposed to do is make lists and assess. And it's a lot of people, they wouldn't call that an action step, but the self assessment is one of the most important action steps because if you do that incorrectly or if you do that with the assumption that it's not necessarily honest with yourself, so if you do that in a more lighthearted way than actually digging in, then
Hmm.
you're not benefiting from the knowledge that he's going to give you later.
Right.
So it's like the kid asking or mom asking the kid, okay, well, what happened? Gives the surface level story. Okay, well, we'll address this and we'll fix this issue. No, but actually, this is what really broke, not just what you can see. Okay, now we have to fix this whole thing.
Sure.
So I like my favorite part about it is that it's encouraged to take in small bits. You could read
Mhm.
it in one day, but I think it'd be overwhelming.
Mhm.
And it's not exactly short, but it gives you a whole bunch of different tactics to, in a very underwhelming way, make overwhelming change.
Hmm. Yeah, and that makes sense with the little things here and there, and because like you
Mhm.
said in your one of your first examples with stopping at a coffee shop or stopping at a fast food place or a breakfast place, whether that's Dunkin' or Starbucks or your local
Mhm.
coffee joint or whatever,
Mhm.
um, that it's almost like justifiable habit in a
Mhm.
way because you make that habit and then you're like, oh, I can keep
Well,
doing this.
you're myelinating a pattern in your brain.
Right.
Nerd moment. Myelin is basically like the lubricant that happens in your brain. I'm gonna give the example of like snow tracks, right? So if you're driving, if you're for the first person in on the road after a snowstorm, you're making the tracks. You're going to go really slowly. It's going to be really hard. But after two or three or four or five or six people go through those snow tracks, there's a rut there. That is
Right.
like the myelin letting that car go through the tracks in your brain.
Easier each time
And
too.
yes, exactly. It's easier. And the more frequently it happens and the more, not necessarily the frequency, but the more times it happens,
Hmm.
the more ingrained you're going to become in that pattern. So you have to remyelinate different patterns in your brain.
Right.
Yes, it feels hard because you are breaking patterns that you might not have known you even had.
Sure. Yeah, and if you go with the snow track theory too, if you want to try to change those snow tracks, you have to kind of dig them up first
Hmm.
and then sift it around
Hmm.
and let it fall in a new way. So,
And even if you do try to go right next to it, you might fall into those bad habits again. And you might fall into those bad patterns yet again.
hmm
And you might not notice when you're falling into it until, oh, shoot. So that lends to the self awareness piece.
right, which is
Yeah,
great. Everybody can benefit from some more self awareness. So
absolutely.
yeah,
Unfortunately, the people who usually need the most self-awareness aren't the ones who seek it out.
that's
So
true. We're the ones that read this kind of book.
exactly.
Still a great recommendation. We will put them in
Mhm.
the show notes. We'll put each one of these 4 books in there with a link to it so you can check it out and see if there's something that you're interested in. Did you have any other final thoughts?
No, I think that, I say no and then keep talking. I think that reading can be really difficult for some people, myself included, and so there are certain things such as To Hell with the Hustle. There's a podcast where he and another author that I
Yeah,
cannot.
John Mark Comer, they both wrote books about hustling
The
at the
ruthless
same time.
elimination. Yeah, the ruthless elimination of hurry is the other one.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yes. Um, so they have a podcast where they talk about it, and additionally, like I said, James Clear has worksheets in his book to help you get through it. Um, there's different reasons that different people read, and so
Mhm.
I always try to read things that are very very logical and very straightforward, and so that's usually the recommendations I'm going to give. Whereas your recommendations are going to be very spiritual in nature. So I think our challenge for next time we talk about books is to read something that we wouldn't necessarily always pick up. Like I
Mhm.
might pick up a fiction book. I find beach
I don't know
reads.
the last time I read a fiction book,
Yeah, I
honestly.
find like the beach reads genre
Probably
to
high
like,
school.
just I don't love it.
Yeah,
Um,
me
but
either.
I will. Maybe I'll read something. But, I think that should be a challenge that we should give each other is to read something or recommend things for each other to read just to see love
Mhm.
them, hate them. But either way, reading cannot be a bad thing.
Agreed. I
Mhm.
also read something funny that you can reading is kind of like journaling for me where it's very overwhelming if I don't do it every day and then I just shut
Mhm.
down, put it away and don't touch it. But
Yeah.
somebody encouraged me by saying, "Why don't you just read one chapter a week?"
Mhm.
You can find time. Everybody can find time in a week to read one chapter of a book. And a book that
Mhm.
has 12 chapters in it, you're done in 12 weeks and you
Mhm.
finished a book. And it's very tangible and it's very small and it's something that's manageable. Whether or not you just
Mhm.
set aside time, every Monday from 9 to 10 a.m. or, 9 to 10 p.m., I'm
Mhm.
going to read one chapter of a book. And then I'm not going to
Mhm.
pick it up until the following week. And then it's fine. It's less overwhelming. You can do it.
Mhm.
So we encourage it.
Hey,
There's some really good books out there.
if you do it every single day, you're making a better habit.
Wow, full circle.
There you go.
You got the pun in this one. Good job.
It's like we planned it.
That's right.
All right, y'all, look out for those links. We love ya. We'll talk to you soon.